Welcome to Shattered Reality with your hosts Kate Valentine and Fahrusha. Prepare to have your paradigms shifted and your truths questioned. And now, Shattered Reality.
Well, hello, Shattered Reality listeners. This is Fahrusha here, and today is March 12th, 2019, and I am here again without Kate Valentine, who really, really wants to come back. I just spoke with her last night, and she really can't wait till she has the opportunity to come back. She has assured me. So it's been a while, but I have faith that she will indeed return to us. Today is our 85th show, and it is going to be, I think, a very interesting one. We have somebody here today who has compiled an enormous number of case histories. He seems to be something between an anthropologist and a folklorist. He is just really interesting in the way that he views these paranormal experiences of others. So, without any further ado, let me introduce Mr. Mike Clelland. Am I saying it right? Is it Cleland or Clelland?
Clelland, you did it perfect the first time.
Okay, good. That's what I thought it was. Well, Mike is here because he has written 2 books about paranormal experiences involving owls, and he also has a blog. And why don't you tell us a little bit about your background, your how you got into this field and subject?
Well, I'm 56 now, and if we turn the clock back to 2006, which is now, I think that's like 13 years ago. Good grief! I had an event when I was living out west in Idaho, where I saw a bunch of owls. That takes up the first little bit of the first book, and I've repeated that story many, many times.
Yes.
But what it was I don't need to. If you want me to go through the whole thing, I can. But I can just for the intro here, I can say that.
I think that perhaps many people have heard that story who might be listening to Shattered Reality. So I think that perhaps going over it in the short run, and those who haven't heard it can listen or read your blog about it or buy one of your wonderful books, which you can feel free to mention.
Perfect. So the short version is I went camping with a friend, and we saw owls. Excuse me. We saw owls. What felt like a very unusual circumstance, and they were surrounding us. And in my head at the moment I saw the owls, I had a voice in my head that said, "This has something to do with the UFOs." And I did not talk about that at the time. I'm talking about it now, but I certainly recognized it. I had that voice in my head. I was very aware of it. And it set me off on my own journey, partially about owls, just because I was so intense. And then afterwards, I was hit with so many synchronicities and other owl sightings. And I recognized that this was unusual, that I was seeing owls in a disproportionate way than anyone should. And and this came at the same time when I was dealing with some of my own memories, some of them from childhood, some of them when I was a younger adult. As a boy, I had UFO sighting. I had a missing time event. And as a young adult, I woke up in the middle of the night and saw 5 gray, skinny beings backlit by a big bright light coming toward my house. And I reacted very oddly. I simply said, "Oh yes, they're here. Now is the time to put my head on the pillow and shut down." And that's exactly what I did. And I kind of dismissed all this stuff. I denied all this stuff. I wasn't going into it. It was all, I treated it as I don't know, just coincidence or odd dreams. And at the same time, I knew that I had to look into this stuff. So I feel my my journey was stuck. Like I was like denying it until the owls came along, and they sort of pushed me off the cliff. And that's where I began my, my journey, would eventually culminate in these 2 big books.
Okay.
So I also have a blog and a podcast, and I haven't done the podcast in ages though. But I have a pretty, for a little blog, I felt like I had a pretty good web presence, and so the research, how to give it to this. So yes, my I would argue, and I'm saying this, and here's what I know for myself. I know owls and UFO contact are connected. I don't know the why of it. I don't know the how of it. I don't know what it means. But I argue that these 2 strange phenomena, like the UFO contact experience and then the archetype of the owl, are somehow interwoven together.
Okay.
And that's the premise of the books.
Well, I want you to name those 2 books in just a minute. But before you do that, I want to take you back to one thing, because I've read this and I've heard it. I've heard you speak it, and I've read this about something that happened to you when I believe you were about 11 years old, and there was a bright flash in the sky. I want you to go back to that because it mirrors my experience in 2 ways. So could you just go over that a little bit?
Absolutely, yes. This would have been 1974. I looked up the television show that I was on my way home to see that night. It was Kolchak the Night Stalker, which is a show I loved. I was the perfect age. I was like a 12-year-old kid. I loved that show. And so there was a high school football game. It was an autumn. It was probably October. I can't know for certain. And I was walking home with a friend, and I wanted to be home in time to see a television show. So we were crossing the street, I know right where it was in the neighborhood, and we were right in front of another friend's house. Her name is Cindy. And it just happened to be we were on her, like near her driveway. And it was a calm, lovely autumn evening. There was nothing unusual about it, pleasant. In the suburbs of way outside of Detroit, it was as safe and pleasant as it could be. So walking along, and then there was an odd, jarring flash. It felt like God flipped a light switch up, click, and flipped it off, click, just on, off. And what happened was that the sky, this is my memory, the sky turned bright orange for like 1 second and then went right back to totally calm. There was no sound, and it was extremely jarring. And both of us were like, what just happened? I mean, this is now over 40 years ago, and I remembered clearly, like, what just happened? And we went through a little checklist. Was it lightning? Did like a telephone line explode somewhere? Nothing made sense. And we kept on walking, and I got to my house first. I was closer in the neighborhood, and he got to his house. He had to walk a little further deeper into the neighborhood to get to his house. And so I walked in the front door, and my parents were angry at me. I'm like, what are you angry at me for? And they're like, you're too, you can't be out this late. I'm like, what do you mean? It's 9:30. I told you I'd be home at 9:30. It's 9:30. And they pointed to the clock, and it was 11:30. It was getting close to 11:30 because the 11 o'clock news was just ending. And I was this is long before I had missing time didn't mean anything. It just was like, no, this doesn't make sense. And my emotional state was I was bummed out because I missed that show. And I was also really confused because my parents were so angry at me. Like, I just didn't feel like it was deserved. I felt like, no, I came home on time. Like, it didn't make sense.
Okay,
so
go ahead.
And then the next Monday in school, we were sitting around the cafeteria, and one of the friends that was with me, his name is Mike also, and he said, I said to the kids at the table, like, we saw something weird in the sky on Friday night. And my friend Mike said, yeah, we saw a UFO with lights and everything. And I just stopped because that was not what I saw. I just felt like the sky lit up orange. And I never brought it up to him ever again. And I sensed it was this funny moment where I was like, he's making this up. He's exaggerating. So and now I'm not. I don't know what to think. I should. And it's on my checklist and things to do in my life is to get a hold of him and actually ask him.
Well, you should, but
I know I should. I know.
I wanted you to go back to that because it mirrors my experience in two ways. I don't have any recollection of missing time, okay? But I was around the same age when I had my first acknowledged UFO experience with a group of other people. I was 11 or 12, don't remember which. And it wasn't with a group of people coming into a lake community, coming home from having been at a drive-in movie with the parents of a boy who I was friends with, who was probably 13 or 14 years old. And they slowed us down coming into the lake community. People stopped us, and there was a UFO in the sky. It was a matter of lights, but they were moving very strangely. So it was interesting to me, the age range, and also the fact that you saw a bright orange flash. Because in the interim, since I was 12 and now, too many years to even admit, I have twice seen bright orange flashes in the sky, and I spoke to some other people about them and said that I thought they were iridium flashes. And then somebody said, no, it only happens at a certain time of the evening. And you're saying this happened at a different time and so forth and so on. And it was not an iridium flash that you saw. You know what an iridium flash is, I take it. Do you?
Sure. That's off the space station usually that has a reflective surface that hits the direct sunlight. Yeah.
So that's the reason why I wanted you to recount that particular experience, simply because I would like to set a stage here where we can parse this out a little bit, what goes on. Now, I've only had one owl experience, and I am happy to say, like when you spoke of your owls, that it was a real owl that I saw driving in a car in Maine, and a lonely, two-way road, well paved but lonely road. The foliage was about several feet back from the edge. I'm going to say 10 feet back, and I am very good for a city gal, I'm very good at spotting birds and animals in the wild. I have an average. Used to have relatively good vision. Now my vision certainly isn't terrible. Probably could use some improvement. But at the time, I just was driving with someone in Maine, spotted an owl, and I said, wow, there's an owl. And I asked the person to back up, and the owl didn't move. And the owl was just sitting there looking at us. And we both took a look at the owl, looked at each other, decided to move on, and that was the whole of my entire owl experience. But like in your book, you have other animals that people could have experiences with, such as cats, raccoons, and deer, all of which I've had experiences with. So I just wanted to set things up to sort of, we're on the same page with a lot of this stuff. The thing that I would mention here about my own point of view, only because some of my questions are gonna point in that direction. And I try not to have a strong opinion about stuff. I try to stay open and sort of Gnostic with a small g. I don't know what it means. This is what I've experienced, kind of thing. But one thing that I am mostly in opposition to most of the research is that I am not convinced that humans are the crown of creation. So I am all open to the idea that owls or cats, for instance, could have much more going on than we give them credit for as humans. Humans are very anthropocentric, as they probably should be on a certain level, but they have a really good opinion of themselves, which I don't necessarily share, which doesn't mean I certainly don't hate anybody, but I think you get where I'm going.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, it's the owl is the way I describe my research in a way is that there comes a point when you have to take your UFO investigator hat off and replace it with your shaman hat,
Yes.
and treat the, so if a UFO investigator, someone has an experience, they contact the UFO investigator. The UFO investigator will ask these questions, the correct questions. They'll say, what time was it? Which direction was it traveling? Could you draw a picture of it? They'll call the airport. They'll check the radar returns from the control tower. They'll do very, very straight, pragmatic things. Call the sheriff's department. Did anyone else? Those are all the correct things to do. You take your UFO investigator hat off and you you put your shaman hat on and you ask, what was going on in your life before the sighting? What changed after the sighting? How has your spirituality changed? Do you have psychic abilities? Are you a creative type? I mean, these are the questions I ask. And this is what's very interesting? I'm not affiliated with MUFON at all. And someone handed me the paperwork one time. I asked and said, hey, can you give me one of those forms that you fill out? And they did. And one of the questions is on the form, very pragmatic form. One of the questions is, have you had any psychic experiences, or has your psychic ability improved since your UFO sighting?
Mm-hmm.
So even a very, very dry conservative organization like MUFON is well aware of this shift that takes place in the observer. Yes, and then so let's say instead of a UFO, now I'm at the point now where I treat UFOs and owls and synchronicities, powerful synchronicities, for a thought experiment. I treat them all as the same thing, right? So you can have a powerful synchronicity and it can influence your life. You can have a powerful UFO sighting and it can influence your life. And you can have a powerful owl sighting. I have some stories, and I've talked to people, it has changed their lives. I've got many stories. Now, so if you were, let's turn the clock back 400 years, if you're living in the plains of North Dakota and you have a bunch of strange owl experiences, right? Who do you go to? You walk to the edge of the village and you kind of knock on the door of the teepee where the shaman lives, and you discuss your owl experiences. Now, the shaman, I can't begin to guess what he might say, but would come at this from a very spiritual place of examining the issues with a broader outlook, with a I would say like a multi-layered vision of reality. Mm-hmm. And that's where I'm coming from as far as this research.
Okay. Well, I understand that. And I am just trying to parse this out for myself, as well as, talk to you. I would like you now, although we've gone off a little bit, I do want you to mention your books and where people can get them and all that, because I think that's important.
Great. So my books there are two books. One is called The Messengers, and it's subtitled Owls, Synchronicity, and the UFO Abductee. And that was my first book. And that's the one where I argue, like I try to make the case that owls and UFOs are connected. It's kind of a big fat book. It's getting close to 400 pages. And so I feel like I've made my case pretty strongly on that one. And what happened when I did the first book is I talked to people, and you probably know just what I'm talking about. You talk to someone on the phone about their experiences, and for them to really tell their story, it's 5 or 6 hours sometimes. Mm-hmm. And so I would talk to as many people on the phone, have long conversations with them, and then I'd write their owl thing up. So they had this grand novel of a life story, and then I would put 2 paragraphs in where they saw their owl, and it broke my heart. So the second book is called Stories from the Messengers, and it's subtitled Accounts of Owls, UFOs, and a Deeper Reality. And that's 19 chapters. Each chapter digs into a personal story, very personal story, and I tried to tell those stories completely. And the thread of anything is the what makes the story similar is the strangeness, this kind of illogical, knotted, tangled strangeness that these stories take on.
Yes.
And I think that's part of it. And I think that's why I know some UFO researchers. I know one guy, he said it. He's just said, like, I can't do abduction research. It's just too time consuming. And he's right, and it's so I feel I'm really happy I did the second book as a companion book, because it really, as I said, it broke my heart to just hear these amazing, powerful stories and not honor those in some way. So that was the goal of the second book. Those are easy to find. You can get them on Amazon. You can just, if you're looking for me in my site, here's the easiest thing to do. Google UFOs and owls, and I am the first thing that comes up, and then I'm about the next 15 things under that. So, and then you can Google my name. I have a website called MikeClelland.com. That doesn't really do much except take you to my other site, which is called Hidden Experience. And that's my blog that I've been running 10 years. Just last week, it was 10 years the blog has been going. So hiddenexperience.blogspot.com. And I have about 200 hours of archived podcasts on that site.
Wow. Yes. Well, you're ahead of us. We're only at 85 here, not 85
Well, some of the
hours.
shows were 2 hours long. Many of the shows were 2 hours long. So
well, some of ours are an hour and 15, 20 minutes, but that's basically about it. Now, there's this thing, let's go back to the animals. And I have here, talking about owls, and I have experiences with cats, lots of experiences with cats, with raccoons, and with deer. I also am aware of what seems to be a recognized fact, that squids are psychic. Are you aware of that?
I had no idea. No.
Well, I mean, just for the record, because we're kind of conversational here, and it's squid. There was a squid, and it's not the only such squid. There was a squid that was being held in a laboratory in Germany, and the squid was able to pick out who was going to win the Fußball, the soccer championship. And this went on. It picked out the winners. And finally, apparently, now I'm probably going back 2 or 3 years, and I'm not a soccer fan, but apparently someone got upset that the squid picked out the team opposite their team, and they came in and murdered the squid.
Soccer hooligans, yeah.
Yes, soccer hooligans. So I'm not sure that humans are on top of the food chain here. In any case, we certainly are prolific, and there are a lot of us here, humans. But squids are apparently quite psychic. There are apparently squid villages north of Australia, deep in the ocean, where huge numbers of squid live together. This is not about their intelligence, but just new things that have been found out about squids in the Indian Ocean and so forth. But I guess my point in saying this is that there are so many things that certain animals can do that we don't recognize, and trees talk to one another. And like, personally, I'm so much about all of that, the bears and the trees and so forth, and not so much about the preeminence of humans. But that being said, what other senses can owls have beyond excellent vision and hearing that humans don't have?
Well, so owls are, just on a, let's take a half a step back and just on a pure, just the presence of an owl, right? You see, a hawk and an eagle are very majestic, they're wonderful birds, beautiful, strong, wonderful birds. They have a vibe about them.
Yes. An
owl has something totally different, has a completely different vibe. And so I have talked to many people who've seen an owl, an ordinary owl, and they basically say it's unnerving. It's like unsettling to be in the presence of an owl. I've heard that many times there's nothing paranormal at all. Owl lands on a fence post and everyone sees the owl and everyone gets kind of the heebie-jeebies from it. That's very common, and I suspect that has been common throughout the ages.
Mm-hmm.
That people, and there's a mythology around owls that grew up around that intensity, right? They have those big eyes, and they have so one of the things that owls have is a head stability, that eerie head stability, and the reason they have that, so you and I have eyeballs, right? They're spheres in our skull, and we can look straight, but make our eyes look right and left. Owls cannot do that. Their eyeballs are not spheres. They're actually like little cone shaped. They're actually mushroom shaped almost. So they are locked in position. So in order for an owl to see right and left, it has to turn its head right and left. And then they do that. They can do that in flight. They also fly extremely quietly, like unnervingly silent. And then, so I'm making comparisons to owls and UFOs. Owls fly with eerie silence, and UFOs are often reported as flying with an eerie silence. So the owl can fly in the dark with those great big eyes. They can see very clearly with almost no visible light. What would be complete and total darkness for you and I, an owl would be completely capable of flying in a forest in the dark. And then they hunt. So a falcon hunts by flying very, very fast. And an owl hunts by flying slowly because they want to make as little noise as possible. So they are actually listening for their prey while in flight in the dark in a forest, which is remarkable to me that they fly in the dark and listen for the sound of a mouse walking on the forest floor.
Wow.
So yes, they are a uniquely skilled animal. And I make a little bit of an argument in the book that, so there's one case. Someone's driving down the road and an owl plops out of the sky and lands right in front of them on the road. And they stop their car, and this owl's kind of flopping around, totally disoriented. And they look up, and there's a flying saucer, and they have a close encounter experience with this flying saucer. Now, did something? So here's an animal with unique hearing abilities, uniquely adapted ears. Did something in the UFO disorient the owl? I mean, that's the implication that the story gives us. There's obviously no way to know, but it's sort of implied in the story. So, is the owl so sensitive at hearing that it can actually hear a UFO when we hear nothing but silence? I mean, is a UFO like a giant dog whistle to an owl?
Yeah. That's certainly an interesting concept to consider, because owls and bats, I guess, and dogs and cats certainly have a different sense of hearing than we do, and owls have a even higher sense of hearing, I suspect, than dogs and cats.
Owls are unique in the animal kingdom. There's nothing that can compare to their hearing.
Indeed. So let's step back just a little bit, and let me ask you if you think that the phenomenon of the UFO phenomenon is one thing or more than one thing. Is it a phenomenon or a phenomena?
Well, I mean, yes. So it's there's like it's many, many things, right? So it's sighting. It's people who have UFO sightings often have accompanying dreams. So
Yes.
how does it get in their head to do a dream? Is it a big metal spaceship that is putting the dream in their head? How did that happen? There are people who have, psychic abilities after their UFO contact. How did that happen? We can, like, we fly into Yellowstone National Park in a helicopter. We shoot and dart grizzly bears. And then we do medical exams on them, and then we get in our helicopter and we fly back, and the grizzly bear wakes up all disoriented and has this strange memory. So yes, we have a like an analogy that we can, and that falls apart when you really examine it, right? If you just look at the surface level of the UFO experience,
Right.
Sure, it's perfect, right? You dig just 1 millimeter below the waterline, and then it all falls apart because, I'm going to say it, people who have these experiences end up as psychics. Not everyone, but it's a recognized side effect within some parts of the research community.
Yes.
So my sense is that there's a wheel with a lot of spokes on it, right? One spoke says UFO sighting, one says prophetic dreams, one says so there's all these things that are connected to the UFO contact. But what I'm interested in, I have no answer at all to what it might be, but what is at the hub of that wheel? What's at the axle where all those spokes join together? What's at the core of this? That's, to me, is the mystery. I don't think we're not going to solve that, but we can certainly dance around it, and we can certainly, look at the stories that are connected to UFO contact and see what they imply.
Okay, so you answered one part of the question, and I will share with you that I consider myself an experiencer. I have never been hypnotized to determine what was the nature, like am I an abductee or what's the other group of people?
Experiencer, contactees,
and the other group, the contactees. Yes, contactees. Yeah. I am an experiencer. I fully admit to being an experiencer, and I have worked as a psychic through most of my adult life.
Oh, I didn't know that. That's wonderful. Okay.
Yes. So there's a lot of synchronicity going on here already. But the question that I am asking is, do you believe that there could be more than one thing causing these experiences? To wit, somebody might see a nuts and bolts type craft that might have certain aspects to it, like leave, as you have written even in your books, trace evidence, looking for marks where it came down, maybe finding these magnesium pieces, these weird magnesium traces that have been held in front of us for a while over the course of years, since the 50s. And then there could be some other experience, which seems to be an unidentified flying object, which could be an orb and isn't a nuts and bolts craft. So what I'm saying is, do you think that there's more than one cause for the UFO experience? Can there be more than one progenitor? Is that the right word? I don't even know.
Yeah, I guess so. My sense is, and I might be wrong, is that there's a core phenomena. The spokes on the wheel all join at one central source. I don't know what that source is. So, and it can show up as a nuts and bolts craft. It can show up as a psychic vision. It can show up as, like, as you said, as an orb. So, and it also can show up in, like, richly symbolic ways. Lots of researchers have recognized this, that these experiences show up in a sort of mythological fable sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
in the elements, including the people's reactions, like death and rebirth and spiritual awakening and things like that, which are often tied into this. Now, so the answer is, I simply don't know. My sense is that there's one core source, and it can manifest in innumerable ways.
Okay.
So we might be seeing many things disparate in the literature,
mm-hmm.
but if we traced it, we had the ability to trace every event back. We pull on every thread. Partially I just hope, just because it sounds cool, but my sense is that it would all trace back to one source, and I don't know what that source might be.
Okay. Well,
I doubt it. It may or may not be from another planet, and
I'm not sure about any of these things. I kind of mostly doubt that they're traveling from Beta Centauri to come here in a nuts and bolts craft, and that there may be some kind of alternative reality. I'm going further ahead than I had intended to at the moment with the talk with you, but at one point you talk about the cosmic window idea, and I have a similar idea, and I sort of see it as fingers poking through a thick, foggy material that we usually do not have access to, what's beyond that thick, foggy material. But I guess my thought is that there could be more than one thing behind that thick, foggy material. At least that's been something of my experience. So not for nothing. I mean, we don't have to have a doctrinaire party line here, but I just put that out there. And I was very impressed by the cosmic window idea because it is similar to my inner feelings about a thick, foggy material that every once in a while a finger pokes through there and you get a glimpse of what's going on. But let's talk about one thing that you've mentioned several times through your books, and that is the primal fear of experiencers of the quote-unquote UFO experience, that other things such as synchronicities and even animal sightings of other sorts don't seem to cause. All right? This primal fear. And I think that a number of people have spoken about it. I have spoken to Chase Kletsky about it, and I've heard Whitley Strieber talk about it, and I have experienced it when I have found that the others were around me in some way in my home, when I felt like I was being taken away, if you will.
And I have felt it too. There's a section at the end of the first book where I talk about an event that took place where I was in a tent with a friend of mine. Her name was Natasha, and both of us woke up screaming. And it was simultaneous, like boom. We were thrust into the way I've referred to it as a synthetic fear, where it seems like it's irrational to sum it up in kind of normal primal ways. It felt like it was projected onto us or into us, if that makes sense. I've heard some people talk about the fact that like perhaps these beings, and that event in the tent culminated with us being totally freaked out, terrified for maybe 10 minutes or less, and then click, we both went to sleep, which is very unusual. That to me is very surprising. I mean, our hearts were pounding so hard. Both of us tell the same thing. She says she describes it as the deepest level of hell.
Yes.
So and I described it as synthetic fear. And so I don't know this. And then there was a bunch of things that happened afterwards that certainly sound like the elements of a UFO abduction event. I felt like I was floated out of the tent. I was in a white realm. I was saying, as I was floating up, I said, I have to remember this. I have to remember this. I have to remember this. And then I actually changed the mantra to, am I on a table? Am I on a table? And then it felt like I was in this white, endless realm. That's the only memory I have. And then it was like, whoosh, I was back in the tent. And I don't remember going back. I don't remember anything. I just remember that was my sense, was just like, whoosh, like it just was like, bam, like in 1 second I was back in the tent. And the next morning I had a very unusual scratch on myself. And I actually remember getting up the next morning and walking around. It was totally like this lovely, it was Colorado. It was this lovely, beautiful morning. I was walking around the tent, like looking for the burn mark in the ground. I didn't find anything. Everything seemed totally normal. We were both kind of shocked at how kind of nonplussed we were about the whole thing. So yes, that primal fear is something that I have heard many people discuss. I've talked to Chase Kletsky about her event also.
My point in that is simply to say that these sort of contact or abduction experiences, which include one feels the presence of alien entities, causes this extraordinary fear, and sometimes we are paralyzed. Although our eyes are open and we are aware of our surroundings, and I've fought those things many times, and do have other sorts of shamanic experiences that do not cause that kind of thing. So we have to look at that in a way. For instance, sometimes when there's a UFO sighting, the dogs go wild in the neighborhood, right? They freak out and they're totally going wild. I'm just making a slight case for somehow the actual presence of the alien entities. Alien could mean anything. It doesn't mean to me necessarily outer space entities. Alien meaning not us. So going further into that, it can be so traumatic to the experiencer that their sanity would be in jeopardy. And I think that is something that you wrote and something that I feel intrinsically is true.
Yes.
Can you speak to that a little?
Yeah. I mean, I feel like I spent, so that, as far as the fear thing, yes, my sanity was in jeopardy. You know what it felt like? It felt like my soul was in jeopardy. It felt like my soul was like a breath away from being extinguished. It was that kind of primal
Yes.
intensity. And then it just turned off and we were both kind of normal. That was actually more shocking than anything. So here's a story. This is she has not given me permission to share the story, so I won't give all the details. A close friend of mine heard my research and mentioned that raccoons were one of the things that people report sometimes in screen memories, and she was very upset because she had an experience where she's young and healthy, and she must have been in her early 30s. Looked out her back door. There was some raccoons on the back porch. And then the next thing she knows, she's paralyzed. She thought she was having a stroke. She thought she was dying. She was totally paralyzed, and it terrified her. She came out of the paralyzed thing, and she immediately called an ambulance, and like they took her to the emergency room. She was so freaked out. There was nothing wrong with her. There was nothing at all. So that's a very telling story.
Indeed.
Yeah. So if the raccoons weren't raccoons, then they would have been some sort of screen memory.
Right.
And perhaps under hypnosis, she would have described I can't say, but I'm just speculating. Perhaps under hypnosis, she might describe the raccoons as, skinny with bald heads and big black eyes, and they're probably not raccoons.
Yes. I've had my own little raccoon issues where I saw a very large raccoon at the head of a driveway, at the top of a driveway going up a hill. And I said to myself, looked at it, it's not a small bear. It definitely looks like a raccoon, but it's way too large to be a raccoon. And in the same time frame, not the same day or anything, there was a cat who was a feral cat that was being fed. And on Easter Day, I'm going to say 3 or 4 years ago, that feral cat was on the front porch of this house that I was visiting. And that feral cat had a marsupial friend, a possum, that sat on that front porch with that cat for whatever reason. I can't even go there, but he did, and he was being fed. And in broad daylight, a raccoon came up and bit the feral cat. Now, I sort of saw, now this is my own interpretation, it might be wrong or right, I sort of saw the cat as a watcher for the building, that home. The feral cat was sort of like a guardian. And that raccoon attacked that cat. Now, it's very unusual for a raccoon who is not rabid to be out during the day. And the cat was checked, and the cat did not have rabies, but the cat lasted, maybe perhaps a year longer or 6 months longer, and did in fact die of other things. But I kind of felt like that was an uncanny raccoon experience, but no terror on my part, but the poor cat bit in the middle of the day by the raccoon.
With a possum there. Now, also one small little point here, which I pay attention to, is it was on Easter Sunday, which is the highly charged day in the calendar.
Yes,
I mean that's a day of ascension. That's a day when, ascending into heaven.
Yes.
So
Yes, it is. It was a charged day, and it was someone saw the owl attacking the cat, and as a result of having seen it out the window somehow, sitting in a dining room, they were able to scare the raccoon away or open the door and disengage the cat and the raccoon from one killing the other. So that's just a little bit there, but
now this is where you get this is where the shaman has to come in. Where does these totem animal experiences, these, and I guess sometimes normal things can happen with owls and cats and raccoons and possums and things like that. But sometimes there's can I tell a story?
Sure, please.
So Easter Sunday. It's an Easter Sunday story. The woman is named Susan Kornacki. She's been out and vocal and talking about her experiences. She was at an Easter party, Easter Sunday. She was with her husband and daughter. And an event took place where she was just like, oh my goodness. And all of a sudden she felt this energy rushing up and down her spine. And she said it felt like a Tesla coil going off. And she said, something's going on. I'm freaking out. I got to get out of here. I'm going to go home. Can you take the kids home and meet me later? So she left the Easter party, went to her home. Easter, it's a spring day. It's in Massachusetts. So she goes to the backyard to relax and just try to get her wits again. And she lays in her hammock. As soon as she gets in her hammock, an owl lands on one branch of the one tree, and then the other tree that the hammock is connected to, it's connected between two trees, and owl lands in the other one. And these two owls start hooting at each other. And she's in the middle, and she feels like this energy like surging through her body. She said it felt like she was being recalibrated. I can't help but think of like a circuit board, and these components. These two little components, this little component, Susan is in the middle of these two owls, and they're all rigged together with the trees and the hammock, and she's being recalibrated. Eventually her husband came home and said, how are you feeling? And she said, what do you notice? He said, well, there's an owl in that branch, and there's an owl in that branch and that tree over there, and they're hooting at each other. And she says, And then afterwards, she had some premonitions about this, and I'm not sure. But afterwards, she started doing healing. Hands-on healing. She doesn't call it Reiki. She calls it hands-on healing. And this is the kind of story that I am drawn to. These very strange symbolic stories like this. Easter Sunday. Mm-hmm. I asked her, do you think it was a Kundalini awakening? She said, no, I don't think so. But that's kind of what she was describing. The energy surge up her spine.
Yes. It does sound like a Kundalini awakening to me, but sometimes these things aren't complete. They don't. So it's quite amazing, and to become a hands-on healer, of course, is a wonderful place to take this energy to, I believe.
Yes, I agree.
So, do you have anything else to say about the idea that people's sanity could be in jeopardy from the presence of these entities? Because this is something that is extremely interesting to me.
I'm trying to think of a case, this is the, how to say it? Like if someone goes up to the top of Mount Olympus back in ancient Greece and like meets the gods, right? They're going to come down and they're going to be crazy. I mean, can't you just see them with like their hair like blown back and the wild look in their eyes?
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, that's the danger.
Indeed.
Right? I mean, so I think of myself so between 2006, when I had that event in the mountains where I saw those owls, and about 2011, that's 5 years. I've said this publicly. I felt like I spent 95% of my waking hours wondering if I had gone insane. And that is not an exaggeration. So what is this? I was in the presence of powerful synchronicities. Yes. I'm certain that these experiences, whether simply the presence. I heard it one time described that they're basically they're on a different vibration than us. They're from some other reality. They're from some other realm. They arrive here. They're vibrating different.
Yes.
I don't know. And so just being in the mere presence of something from an alternate reality that's just not in sync with our vibrations. I'm using terms that I don't know. I'm probably explaining incorrectly, but that is my sense.
I don't think you're
that.
explaining it incorrectly. I think you're explaining it correctly, because there are vibrations in the contact experience, there are vibrations in sleep paralysis, there are vibrations in the epileptic migranic disorder, and there are vibrations in the Kundalini awakening. And I get different kinds of vibrations when I go to the Monroe Institute and use their Hemisync technology to meditate. I sort of run energy through my body, and it is doable, and it is not in itself horrifying or terrifying. But when you have the vibration in the contact experience, that is, the average person, I put myself in that category in this case, tries to fight it at all costs, because of this horrible primal fear factor.
And yes, I did not know. So I have here. Can I tell a story about the Hemisync tapes?
Sure.
So this is I had an experience in 2013 where I slept outside and I saw what I thought was a landed flying saucer on a hilltop. And I just laid there and I rolled over, went back to sleep, and said, that's some big house. And then I went back to the site later and there's no big house there.
Boy, yes.
So I that bugged me. And it was, what was interesting about that event, there was no fear associated with it all. Everything about that whole thing was pleasant. It was a beautiful night. The stars were beautiful. I was sleeping in southern Utah and I was sleeping outside alone. And I heard a coyote near my head, which is it was close as any. It was so close I don't understand why I didn't see it. And that it was loud and it woke me up. So there's a totem animal, a coyote.
Trickster.
And I was in a trickster waking me up. And then there's a round house on a hilltop. Now, I also saw a light behind a bush. Now there's another sort of biblical imagery there.
The same
bush.
night, Mike?
The same night. And so I rarely meditate. Every once in a while I will. And I like the Hemisync tapes with Robert Monroe's voice. He's got this kind of radio announcer voice.
Yes.
And he says, he's leading the meditation, doing simple things like take your troubles and put them in a big heavy box. You won't be needing them for the length of your session.
Yes.
And then all of a sudden he's talking and he says, and now take the fingers of your right hand and press them to your forehead. When you touch your forehead, the issue at hand will be revealed. And I'm like sitting there in my living room. I got a little meditation stool. I'm as calm as can be. It's just, and I'm in the sunshine. It's warm. And he says, take the fingers of your right hand, touch your forehead, and the issues at hand will be revealed. And I just touch my forehead. Bam! I get the electric image, clear as a bell, of me lying on the ground at that site in Utah where I saw the round thing on the hilltop, and I am surrounded by gray aliens.
Wow.
They're standing in a circle around me. And I was in a totally calm state. It was as peaceful a vision as it could be. It probably lasted click 1 second, and I have like what amounts to a single slide, like sort of seared into my memory of that event.
That is quite amazing. That is quite amazing, and I have lots of experience with the Monroe Institute and the Hemisync experience, and it can be a powerful one in the right circumstance. Absolutely. I have certain things that I do to try to ground myself, which is two things I can mention. One thing is try to find the most pragmatic and parsimonious explanation for stuff that happens to me, so I don't go off the deep end, because I come very close at times.
As do I. Yeah.
And so I try to look for the most pragmatic thing possible, but often it isn't the most pragmatic thing possible, such as the orange flash that we both experienced at different times and different days. And perhaps it wasn't an iridium flash in my case, but I try not to focus. And another stupid thing that I do when I get too overwhelmed with my thoughts about these things, even in breaks and reading your books, I went and did I played solitaire a game or two in between on the computer to just sort of let my thoughts settle, because when I play solitaire, it's like a meditation of sorts. It just takes my mind away from whatever's going on in the present or what I've been reading, and it allows my subconscious to sort of shake my brain a little bit and settle the thoughts so that I'm able to go back to, say, reading or to what I was thinking about afterwards. So it's my own little meditation and bring my feet back onto the ground situation. Now, one thing I wanted to ask you about, I've been to the Omega Institute a number of times, and one of the times I went there, I've been up there for shamanic events, and I was with a large group of people for one of these shamanic events with Mr. Perkins. I'm trying to think of his first name, not David Perkins.
No, John Perkins.
John
Perkins, the guy who the Hitman book. What was it called? The
Yes,
Economic Hitman book.
The Economic Hitman, indeed. And I was up there for one experience which involved the meeting of the eagle and the condor, which was a shamanic gathering where American people who were involved on some level in a shamanic experiences would represent the eagle, and the South American shamans that he had brought up from mostly Peru, but I think there were a couple of countries, mostly Peru, they represented the condor. So we're still talking about birds here on some level. And there were a number of people who were fully or part Native American, and they indicated to me that there is a big prohibition or taboo on owl magic among a lot of Native American First Nations tribes. So do you want to speak to that a minute or two?
So I'm not an expert on this by any means. From what my understanding is, it depends on the tribe, right? So if clustered around, let's say the Southwest Plains Indians, boy, the Zuni and the Hopi and the Navajo owl is like bad medicine.
Yes.
And I spoke to I think he was Navajo, and he said that it's funny, he did not know about my book, and because I was speaking at a conference and he was selling some jewelry. Him and his wife were selling some jewelry at a table at this conference, and he said, "You're the owl guy." And I said, yeah, because he saw the little, and he didn't know that he said, we call the owl the messenger. And I was like, well, that's the name of the book. And he said, in their language, owl and sinister are synonyms. They're the same word. So yeah, you don't know. It's like I talked to someone who worked at a little elementary school in I can't remember where it was. I think it was in Arizona. And so it was a poor community, and she was volunteering there, and it came time the kids were going to graduate and the school year was over. So she put all these little, the things you would get at at the drugstore, there's little pictures of owls with little graduation caps on their head. And so she thumbtacked those up to the bulletin board, and boy, the parents came in and don't do that. You can't do that. It was like, that was.
And this was a Native American community?
Native American community in I think Arizona.
Uh-huh.
So there's a very strong. Now, owls are associated with death in almost every culture,
mm-hmm.
and that's understandable. Even in our culture, even in the simplest form, like if you want to create a scary mood, right? You're making a movie, you just have someone walk through the woods at night and they have to hear an owl hooting, and boom, everyone that establishes this is eerie, this is spooky. Everyone recognizes that little sound effect. But I don't think that's necessarily true of all the tribes.
No.
And I can't speak. I know that where I'm in the Northeast here, the Mi'kmaq tribe, it's my understanding they treat the owl with a different kind of reverence. It is often still considered to be a messenger of a bad omen. It doesn't make the owl bad, but it can be delivering a bad message. I have not found this in my research, except for some fleeting cases. I have not found this. I have found certainly the owl shows up before very challenging experiences. Doesn't make them bad,
Right.
but before challenging experiences. And I've also found very few stories of owls showing up before a death. That's the folklore. Owls showing up before a death. I have found almost none of those. I've found many, many examples of owls showing up after a death.
Mm-hmm.
And it often the death of a parent.
Interesting. Very, very interesting that you should bring this up. And I'm not going to tell this whole story here right now, but when I went to disperse the ashes of my parents, I went to certain places to sprinkle a few ashes, and at each place that I went to, pairs of ducks showed up in places where you would not expect pairs of ducks to show up, or one place that a pair of ducks could show up, but just as soon as I put some ashes by the edge of the water, ducks showed up in 3 different places. So perhaps I will email you my my little story from my blog about that.
This is birds in general. I think birds are associated with death, but in owls, I'm getting the owl stories, right? So I'm
Yes.
making an open call. So it's not by accident that I'm getting owl stories.
Right.
I'm asking for them and they're arriving. So there's certainly here's the story. A woman had a hawk show up at her house.
Mm-hmm.
It was showing up all the time. And it was like making itself known. And she was a private detective. This was great. If you want to, she was a good person to interact with. She was very level-headed and grounded. And she's like, why is this hawk showing up at my house? And I'm like, I don't know. Like, well, how am I supposed to know? Like, the next time it shows up, I just made this up on the spot. Next time it shows up, you ask the hawk. Just ask it aloud. And so the hawk showed up again, and it was on her garage roof, and she looked at this hawk, and she said, I very respectfully ask why you are here. I'm grateful for your visit, but I'm asking you, why are you visiting me? And the hawk looked at her, and she looked at the hawk, and the hawk eventually flew away, and she walked in the house, and the phone rang. She picked up the phone, and there was nobody there. And the call, the name it gave the town where the call came from.
Mm-hmm.
It was from Francine, Massachusetts. And she's a private detective. She's like, looked up Francine. There is no Francine, Massachusetts. She dug and she dug and she dug. She called the phone company. She actually found out that there was a Francine exchange that had long since been, back when wires and landlines and stuff, they would have exchanges. And
Right.
it was like, that was the location it came from. There was no town called Francine. Her mother's name was Francine, and her mother had just recently died.
Aha.
So who organized that, right? I mean, that was, to me, that I don't know, that I call that magic, right? Some magical event took place. So
Certainly.
she asked the owl, she asked the hawk, I almost called it an owl. She asked the hawk, can you tell me why you're here? And then boom, a bell rings from Francine.
That is quite amazing. And to add to all these synchronicities, Mike, today is the anniversary of my mother's birthday, who has passed. And we're talking about all of this. And I happened to look on my Facebook page, and they try to tell you, do you want to repeat something that you said like a few years ago on this day? Do you want to put this out again? And I had kind of forgotten this, but it did apparently happen that in 2011, the doorbell rang on this day, and no one was there. And I really felt like it was a message from my mother.
How interesting. Yeah, today is also what I consider my confirmation event, where I basically had the event, which is long, takes about a half hour to tell this story. I won't go into it now. But I had a psychic vision on March 12th, 2013, 2 days after that event, where I saw the roundhouse on the hill. So the
Right.
question I ask people, what happened after your UFO event? What changed in your life? So what changed in my life less than 48 hours after that event was basically I had an absolute, total knowing that this stuff was really happening. I had been denying it and trying to weasel my way out of it, but I had an absolute, total knowing that this was real. And I've been at that place since. So
Are you a philosophical idealist?
I have no idea. Oh, go on.
Insofar as do you have a inner feeling that what we experience in 4D, what we call reality, is almost in itself a screen memory, and that our real essence is something else?
So the answer to that one is yes.
Okay.
Yes, very much so. So I mean, that was a very nice way to put it. And yeah, I mean, whatever this is, that we're in someone else's dream. I don't know how else, we're like the construct, right? What does it mean? I mean, they talk to physicists, like there's no matter, right? We should be able to
Right.
just pass our hand through the table, but we can't. There's
No.
there's some like, like the code that was typed into the hard drive says, no, you're gonna stub your toe if you kick the table. But in the reality, there's no matter at all. The atoms, when you get right down to are just little fluffs of energy. So I agree. Yes,
There's no there there.
There's no there exactly.
So,
Except at the same time, you stub your toe and it hurts. Yeah.
so one other thing that really surprised me, all of a sudden when I came upon the chapter about Dr. Kirby's surprise, whatever happened to that gentleman?
He's around. Oh, he's around. Yeah, you could call him up. He lives in San Francisco. He's a practicing clinician, and he's a very smart, interesting guy. He would be a great guest on your show.
I would love to have him on the show.
His
by
book
the
is
way.
wonderful. His book is called Synchronicity. His name is Dr. Kirby Surprise. So this is a funny story. So like, I was listening to his book came out and he was doing a little podcast circuit. And I was listening to a lot of podcasts at the time. This is going back about, I guess, 2012 or so.
Mm-hmm.
And I basically contacted him and said, listen, I'm having a lot of synchronicities. And I also feel I've had UFO contact. And I feel that synchronicities and UFO contact are connected. And then he gets back to me, and I'm paraphrasing from memory, but and he gave me permission to say all this. He says, well, that's all well and good, but I've had my own UFO contact, and it's not related to synchronicity. And I'm like this is in an email, and I'm like, well, wait a minute, you wrote a book about synchronicity, and you've had UFO contact, and you don't think it's connected? And he was like, I see where you're going with this. Read my book. I think you'll enjoy it. And then let's talk. And so I read his book. And on page like 219 or something like that, he says you can generate synchronicities, which I think you can do. He says you simply ask synchronicity, simply ask it politely, would you generate synchronicities for me on a theme? And he says, here's what I like to do. I like to create owls. So like, here's the guy with UFO contact. We talked about it. It's a very interesting set of stories he has. Here's a guy with UFO contact, writes a book about synchronicities, and creates owls.
Amazing.
Like, this is owls, synchronicities, and UFOs. This is the core of my research. So we had a wonderful talk, and I'm so glad I recorded it. I love that chapter. And I felt like, Luke Skywalker at sitting with Yoda, talking with him. He was further down this path than I was, and it was a joy to talk to him.
Wow. Yeah, I'm very interested in him, and I'm very interested in finding out more about him. So perhaps I will try to contact him again. I think I tried to contact him a couple of years ago and was unsuccessful, but perhaps now would be a good time to do so. Getting back, do you want to tell us the name of your books again and anything?
Oh, sure.
Just for your own sake?
Yeah. So the books are... the first book is The Messengers. It's a little bigger than the second book. And the subtitle is Owls, Synchronicity, and the UFO Abductee. And the second book is Stories from the Messengers. And the subtitle is Accounts of Owls, UFOs, in a Deeper Reality. And they have actually been quite successful. My publisher is extremely happy. Nobody's UFO books really sell that many, but they're selling quite well, and they've been extremely well received. I go way out there with my speculation. Like I just try to leave no stone unturned and just wrestle with all these ideas the best I can. And so and I've said this before, I'm extremely proud of these books. I've worked really hard on them, and I'm happy with the way they turned out, and I'm very proud of them. So you can find those very easily. My name is Mike Clelland, Clelland. You can find me easy enough on Googling. And you can get those books on Amazon. That's probably the easiest way to do it. Or you can go to your local bookstore and just ask them, and they can order them.
Well, before we go, I want you to tell another story, but before you do that, I want to say that I had heard you on other podcasts before, and I have a very, very bad habit. It's not a bad habit. It's, something that I do. I guess it's not evil bad, but it's a habit. And what I do is I will listen to a podcast as I'm falling asleep. And sometimes I don't get to hear the end of the podcast because I fell asleep. And I have heard you on other people's shows, and I've always heard the story about you going camping at the beginning of the show, which is why I didn't let you do it.
I told it many times. I was so glad you didn't let me tell that one
today. But I always thought that you were interesting. I thought that you had sort of a niche place in the group of experiencers and researchers and so forth, and it was a niche thing, but it was kind of cool and it was kind of interesting, and I let it go with that. But when I was reading your book, it was, especially when I first started, as you recall, I contacted you when I first started about something that happened to me. I was just getting in maybe 10, 15, 20 pages into the book, and I was saying, wow, this is much more than I thought. It's much more than a niche experience. He really has something going on here. And at that point, I had to hang up my laundry. And I hung up my laundry in a bathroom over a tub, and it was very light laundry. It was mostly a lady's unmentionables. And put it up on a hanger with the kind of clothespin hanger that's all made into the hanger, and there are different branches on it, and you hang up your underwear, basically. And so I did that, and I'm thinking about the book, and I'm thinking, wow, this is really kind of cool. This is more than I thought it was. And I turned off the light, I left the bathroom, and like fraction of a second after I turned out the light, I heard a crash, and I thought, damn, the thing fell into the hanger thingy with the clothespins on it, must have fallen into the tub, and now I have to go and figure this out, and I hope it's not broken. I went back in. The stuff was hanging still over the top of the shower curtain rack, but there in the tub were 2 quarters. Came out of nowhere, came out of the ceiling. There was nothing there to put the 2 quarters, to have any reason for the 2 quarters to be there. And we had a little discussion about it, you and I, online, and I really decided it happened to make me pay attention to you, to really take what you had to say very seriously. And not that I don't take my guests seriously, I do. I take everyone seriously that I determined to have on the show, or in the case of Kate and I, that we determined to have on the show, but lately it's been me. And so I really put a lot more thought into this, in the sense that when we started, I said this is going to be a little bit different kind of interview because I'm going to participate somewhat equally, if you will.
And that's the kind of interview I prefer. So that's a wonderful story. And I don't know how to say this. What you just shared, I have heard that in so many variations, essentially what you have just described, where someone either reading the book, oftentimes watching a YouTube video too, or listening to an audio, will have these experiences. There's a researcher named Jeffrey Kripal.
Oh, yes.
And he
know
calls these
him. Yes.
the book experiences. And so I don't understand it. I'm getting so many emails of people telling me essentially the same story that you just told me, not with 2 quarters, but with an owl hooting out the window, or some paranormal event that would take place, even seeing a UFO. Here's a guy, here's one story. Guy finishes the book. He's reading it, and he's on a break at work, and he's in his car. He's coming, and he just reads the last little bit. It's on his phone, right? So he reads it on his phone, reads the last little book of the digital thing, the last page of the messengers, and he leaves the car, and he walks towards work, and he says, I want to see an owl. and he looks up in the sky, and there's a bright light in the sky, and he says it was like a minus sign shape, and he said, you know what it was like? It was like someone took the fabric of the sky and took a thin razor blade and cut in, and light was peering in through the outside of the fabric of the sky, like peering in at the night from the nighttime sky.
Wow.
So here's the guy reading the book, asks to see an owl and sees a UFO.
And this was not Jeffrey Kripal.
No, this was not Jeffrey Kripal, but
Okay,
this is what I would call the book experience. Like he calls this the book experience when people have these experiences that are related to books.
Wow, well, that is extraordinary. Before we let you go, and I think our time has basically come to an end, unfortunately, because I think I could talk to you for a much longer time. Could you give us one final experience that really stands out to you from your book or from your files, if not in your book? It could be in the book. It doesn't have to be.
I did a hypnotic regression. I have a funny little anecdote that came from the hypnotic regression. I can talk about that.
Sure. Go ahead.
So I I'll tell you a couple little very short stories. So, woman, she's now a grandmother. She was driving. This is not the hypnosis experience. I'll just fill that in. So the woman's driving home, or excuse me, this woman is a grandmother now. And when she was a teenager, she was severely depressed and she was going to commit suicide. And she got in her car and she had a spot all picked out in the woods, a little turnoff in the woods. And she was going to go there to with a hose take from the tailpipe into the car and a pillow. And she driving along and she's approaching the turnout and she slows down to turn into the turnout and an owl flies right up to the windshield. And she says she locks eyes with this owl. She said it felt like it was there for 15 seconds and then it flies off. And she turned around and came home. So there's an experience where an owl saved her life. She recognized the power of that experience. So
that's a beautiful story, saving a life, and that is just beautiful. I don't have another word for it. It's just a lovely story.
Yeah, and I have a couple of those that play out almost exactly like that.
Well, so when we look through the cosmic window, we stick some fingers through that thick, foggy material, and we get to see this little glimpse of another reality, we should all pay attention, huh, Mike?
That's the one thing that synchronicity is just saying, pay attention. If you try to read any deeper than that, you're just going to get lost. Just pay attention. Yes.
Indeed. Well, thank you so very much for being our guest, and we hope to speak to you again in the not too distant future. And that's about it, I guess. From Shattered Reality, we wish you well.
This has been a delight. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're really welcome, and we'll be in touch.
Yes.
Take care.
Bye now.
So, Shattered Reality listeners, I hope you have enjoyed this conversation with Mike Clelland, who has written the Messengers books about owls, and you will check him out at mikeclelland.com. And from that site, apparently, you can get to all of his other sites. Our next guest, we have pretty much locked in, so I feel somewhat okay about announcing him. I don't like to announce people that haven't absolutely checked in with us. And our next guest is supposed to be Dr. Robert Moss, who is a dream researcher, and he will be with us in 2 weeks from today. So please, if you have any experiences with owls or other experiences with other animals that seem to be paranormal, I invite you to get in touch with us. We will be glad to have you in our listeners' corner. Try to like our page on Facebook. Shattered Reality Podcast is our page. Just put that in the bar. Again, we have 2 websites, shatteredrealitypodcast.wordpress.com and shatteredrealitypodcast.com. You can find us on the podcasting sites such as iTunes and Stitcher. And then we have a number of our podcasts up on YouTube. So please make your comments, like us, like the individual podcasts, like our whole operation. We appreciate every single listener. And thank you so much for listening to Shattered Reality. Bye now.